I must be dreaming. Either that or I'm in the Twilo zone. No, I must be dreaming, and it's not really happening to me. Because if it was really happening to me, and I was a Twiloite, and the absorbitron was really working, I wouldn't have any thumbs. And I've got my thumbs.
Remember when TV comedy meant a lanky guy in a skinny tie tripping over an ottoman, a housewife in capri pants, and a writer's room that somehow felt funnier than the show they were writing? The Dick Van Dyke Show was that sweet spot. Dick Van Dyke as Rob Petrie, Mary Tyler Moore as Laura, Carl Reiner pulling strings as creator and popping up as the vain Alan Brady, with Buddy and Sally firing off punchlines from the writer's room like it was live ammunition. It all kicked off on CBS back in 1961 and ran for 5 seasons and just under 160 episodes, all in crisp black and white and all smarter than they had any right to be. If you grew up catching it in syndication, you already know, this show was a crash course in how TV comedy is supposed to work. Today, we're digging deep into 15 weird and wonderful facts you didn't know about the Dick Van Dyke Show. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Remember When for more deep dives into the shows that raised us, and share this video with a friend who still braces anytime they see an ottoman in a living room. Now, let's get into the countdown with number 15, the time when Carl Reiner fired himself. Before the Dick Van Dyke Show became one of the smartest, funniest sitcoms ever made, it completely face-planted. And that failure turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to it. In 1960, creator Carl Reiner wrote and starred in a pilot called Head of the Family. Same basic setup, same writer's room, same home life comedy, very different vibe though. Reiner played the lead himself. CBS watched it and passed. Not because the writing was bad, they liked the scripts, the problem was Reiner.
Everybody likes me. You like me, don't you? See, and you got great taste.
Executives said he was too intellectual, too forceful, and the ultimate TV sin at the time, too New York. Apparently, middle America wasn't ready for a sitcom dad who looked like he knew what a bagel was. Enter legendary producer Sheldon Leonard, who loved Reiner's writing but delivered one of the most brutally honest notes in TV history. He told Reiner, "We'll get a better actor to play you." Ouch, but also fair? Reiner stepped back from starring and focused on what he did best, writing and producing. Leonard went hunting for a lead who felt more mainstream and more approachable. Someone who could trip over an ottoman and make you love him for it. That's when he saw Dick Van Dyke on Broadway and Bye Bye Birdie, and that was it.
Everything is rosy since I found my Rosie.
Same old words.
Van Dyke had charm, timing, and rubber limbs that seemed personally offended by gravity. Pair him with a then newcomer named Mary Tyler Moore, and suddenly the show snapped into focus. Same concept, same writers, but totally different magic. With the recast in place, CBS said yes. The failed pilot was quietly buried in a drawer somewhere, and the title was changed, and television history was made. All because Carl Reiner was willing to fire himself. Number 14, Johnny Carson almost played Rob Petrie, and late night would have been screwed. Before Johnny Carson became, well, Johnny Carson, with the desk, the monologue, and the undisputed king of late night, he was almost something else entirely. Rob Petrie. When the Dick Van Dyke Show was being cast, Carson wasn't a long shot or a novelty name, he was a serious finalist. It came down to just 2 people, and Carson checked a lot of boxes. By the early 1960s, he was already a known television personality, hosting the game show Who Do You Trust? He also had real experience in comedy, which meant he actually understood what Rob Petrie's job felt like. That mattered.
How you doing, Fred? Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, it was a good game, wasn't it, Fred? Yeah, good game. You want it now?
This wasn't a goofy sitcom about a guy in a wacky hat. This was a show about deadlines, creative anxiety, and trying not to get fired. Producers reportedly liked that Carson came across as relaxed, likable, and easy to watch. After the network rejected Carl Reiner for being too New York, Carson looked like the perfect antidote. Smart but not threatening, funny but not exhausting. And yet, that same smoothness worked against him. Executives worried Carson already felt like a star. He was too confident, too polished, and too much like a guy who already had his name on a parking space.
So every Thursday night, my wife turns on the set. I come out, I say, "Hello, I'm Johnny Carson." My kids say, "Oh, it's only Daddy, let's go to bed." Night, kids.
They weren't sure America would buy him as an anxious suburban husband tripping over ottomans and sweating about deadlines. So they went with Van Dyke, and Carson went back to hosting game shows for about 5 minutes, because in 1962, The Tonight Show came calling, and the rest is television history. Here's the thing, if Carson had landed Rob Petrie, he almost certainly wouldn't have been free to take that gig. He would have been locked into a sitcom contract, playing a TV writer in New Rochelle instead of becoming the man who owned 1130 for 30 years. One casting decision, two completely different legacies. Number 13, Mary Tyler Moore lied her way into television history. When casting began for Laura Petrie on the Dick Van Dyke Show, creator Carl Reiner and producer Sheldon Leonard weren't just looking for chemistry, they needed someone who could believably play a mother, a wife, and an equal partner to a professional comedy writer. And then they met Mary Tyler Moore. She walked in and nailed it. The timing, the presence, the way she could hold the screen without breaking a sweat.
What's going on there?
Oh, nothing, darling, nothing. Millie just asked me a question. What'd you call about?
Well, nothing really.
Well, you just called to sing about my hair?
There was just one tiny problem. She was 23, Dick Van Dyke was 36. Van Dyke was worried that audiences wouldn't buy them as a young married couple. They'd see a guy standing next to his much younger sister, or worse, some executive's idea of a starter wife. And that would tank the whole everyman thing the show was going for. Mary knew all of this. So she did what plenty of smart people in Hollywood have done when the numbers aren't working in their favor. She fudged them.
Honey, what are you trying to say?
You just don't care.
Don't care about what?
Well, if you don't know what you don't care about, then I'm certainly not going to tell you.
During casting, she told the producers she was 26. Not a dramatic lie, but just enough to clear the hurdle that could have killed her chances before she finished her audition, and it worked. By the time she came clean, the show was already moving forward and nobody wanted to mess with a good thing. When Reiner found out, he basically shrugged. She carried herself like she'd been doing this for years, so why argue with results? Looking back, their chemistry is still the gold standard of TV marriages. They felt like actual partners, two people who'd argue about whose turn it was to call the babysitter. All because one actress added 3 years to her resume and nobody bothered to check. Number 12, the capri pants that freaked out television. In 1961, network television basically had a dress code for wives. Dresses, heels, pearls, even while vacuuming. So when Mary Tyler Moore insisted that Laura Petrie wear capri pants on the Dick Van Dyke Show, you'd think she'd asked to burn down the CBS building. Moore pushed for the change because she thought the standard TV housewife image was ridiculous. Women didn't clean their homes dressed for a cocktail party. She and her friends wore pants around the house, and she believed Laura Petrie, a modern woman married to a professional writer, should look like someone who actually lived in their home. The powers that be did not care about her logic. The biggest pushback came from CBS executives and sponsors, especially Procter & Gamble, who were worried about how those pants fit. Network censors even coined a phrase for the problem: cupping under. Yes, that was the official concern, written down in a memo by adults with jobs. They claimed the capris hugged Moore's backside a little too well and were worried it was too provocative for a family sitcom. Keep in mind, married couples couldn't even share a bed on TV during this time, so it's no wonder they thought tight pants were a real threat to American morality. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Laura Petrie could wear pants, but only in one scene per episode. That rule eventually went out the window. Moore and creator Carl Reiner started sneaking the capris in more scenes. One extra shot here, one there, until one day they just stopped pretending to follow the rule at all. Here's the funny part though, instead of sending angry letters, viewers loved Laura's look. The capri pants became one of the most recognized wardrobe choices in sitcom history, and television quietly loosened its grip on the apron and heels fantasy. Number 11, the theme song had lyrics and nobody knew for 40 years.
The Dick Van Dyke Show.
Everyone knows the upbeat swinging theme to the Dick Van Dyke Show, but what most people don't know is that it has lyrics, and for decades, no one knew they existed. The familiar instrumental theme was composed by Earl Hagen, perfectly synced to that famous opening shot of Rob Petrie either dodging or face-planting over the ottoman. Jazzy, energetic, and instantly recognizable. But after the show wrapped, Maury Amsterdam, who played Buddy Sorrell, and who in real life was a guy who probably wrote jokes in his sleep, decided the theme needed words. He wrote a full set of lyrics and titled them Keep Your Fingers Crossed. The show was already off the air, so the lyrics never got used. they sat in a drawer for decades. Then Dick Van Dyke started singing them.
Do you think that you've got troubles? Well, trouble's a bubble, so tell old Mr. Trouble to get lost.
In 2003, Van Dyke and his a cappella group performed the long-lost lyrics at the TV Land Awards, casually revealing that one of the most famous sitcom themes of the 60s had been a full song this whole time. Maury Amsterdam finally got his song heard. It just took 37 years.
Larry Matthews and Mary Tyler Moore.
Number 10, the show was canceled until the sponsor flexed. The Dick Van Dyke Show was almost a goner. One season in and CBS decided not to renew it. During the 1961-62 season, the show struggled in the ratings, finishing 80th out of 117 programs. That's not need time to grow bad, that's we've already packed your stuff into a box bad. It didn't help that CBS scheduled it opposite The Perry Como Show, one of the biggest hits on television. One season, done, thanks for playing. But this was early 60s television and networks didn't always have the final word, sponsors did. The show's main sponsor was Procter & Gamble, and while P&G occasionally clashed with creator Carl Reiner, especially over Mary Tyler Moore's scandalous pants situation, they genuinely loved the show. More importantly, CBS needed them. Badly. Procter & Gamble wasn't just buying ads in primetime, they were the financial backbone of CBS daytime, sponsoring massive hits like As the World Turns and Search for Tomorrow. Shows that printed money 5 days a week. Soap operas funded by an actual soap company. It's beautiful irony, really. Executive producer Sheldon Leonard understood the situation perfectly. He didn't threaten CBS because he didn't have to. Leonard made sure Procter & Gamble understood the leverage they held, and P&G made its position crystal clear. Renew the Dick Van Dyke Show or watch those daytime advertising dollars find a new home. CBS suddenly remembered how much they loved the Dick Van Dyke Show. A second season was ordered. Carl Reiner sweetened the deal by negotiating discounted summer reruns, giving new viewers a chance to discover the show while competitors were off the air.
All he needs a few more jokes for the opening monologue and the whole show is written. And Buddy came up with a view. Tell him.
See if you like this.
Then CBS moved the series to follow the Beverly Hillbillies, and the turnaround was immediate. By the third episode of season 2, the show cracked the top 10. What started as a dead sitcom became one of the smartest, most influential comedies in television history, all because a soap company reminded CBS who was really paying the bills. Number 9, the sitcom was Carl Reiner's life with the names changed. The Dick Van Dyke Show was fictional, but if you knew Carl Reiner's real life, you could connect the dots pretty quickly. Rob Petrie was essentially Reiner with a different name and better dance moves. A comedy writer juggling deadlines, egos, and a home life. Kinda like Reiner did on the legendary 1950s variety series, Your Show of Shows. Buddy Sorrell, the hyper joke-spewing human pinball played by Maury Amsterdam, was inspired by Reiner's former writing partner, Mel Brooks. Loud, relentless, and completely incapable of turning the joke machine off. If you've ever seen Brooks in an interview, you know exactly which parts didn't require exaggeration. Sally Rogers was inspired by two women.
Rob, did you act real surprised when Laura gave you the projector?
Well, she didn't give me a projector.
She didn't?
Lucille Callan and Selma Diamond were the only female writers in the Your Show of Shows room, and Sally borrowed from both. She was groundbreaking for the time. Single, career-driven, and treated as an intellectual equal by her male co-workers. Not a novelty, not a punchline, just one of the guys who happened to be a woman. Even the boss drew from real life. Kind of. Many viewers assumed the egocentric Alan Brady was based on Sid Caesar, the star of Your Show of Shows. Reiner always shut that down. He said Caesar was supportive and collaborative. Alan Brady, on the other hand, was deliberately written as vain, demanding, and exhausting.
I'll read it no matter what Alice Amherst says. Here, hold this. I'll read it.
And if you like it?
Well, I'm positive I won't like it, Rob.
Well, if you don't hate it.
If I don't hate it, I'll do it.
Inspired by guys like Milton Berle and Jackie Gleason, who were famously not easy to work with. That grounding in real people and real creative chaos is why the show felt different. The arguments, the insecurities, the deadlines, the delicate dance of collaboration, Reiner had lived versions of all of it. He just changed the names and let the work speak for itself.
Sir, I have an announcement to make. I have left the gutter for good.
Number 8. Dick Van Dyke did all of that completely untrained. Now, here's a fact that's hard to believe, but it is 100% accurate. Dick Van Dyke never took a formal lesson in acting, singing, or dancing. Not one. The guy who danced across rooftops with cartoon penguins and Mary Poppins figured it out as he went. Van Dyke's career started far away from stages and spotlights, in radio, where he worked as a teenage announcer and DJ. Later, he created a nightclub comedy act called the Merry Mutes, where he mimed to records. No dialogue, just faces, timing, and slapstick. That's where he learned how to use his body, not through technique, but through instinct.
Where the morning glories
whine around your door.
Then came the late pivot. In 1960, Van Dyke was cast in the original Broadway production of Bye Bye Birdie. He was 34 years old and had never danced professionally. Instead of being trained first and cast later, he learned the choreography during rehearsals. Choreographer Goer Champion quickly realized this wasn't a guy to mold into textbook steps, so he didn't. He built the routines around Van Dyke's natural movement of long limbs, loose joints, and an almost athletic elasticity. Van Dyke has often joked that he's a fake because he never learned proper technique, but fans and professionals argue that's exactly why no one has ever moved like him.
Oh, I once heard a poem that goes, a rose is a rose is a rose.
Formal training would have smoothed out the weirdness. Instead, he danced the way the music felt. He studied Buster Keaton and Stan Laurel, learning precision, balance, and how to make physical effort look accidental. He later became close friends with Laurel and even delivered the eulogy at his funeral. And make no mistake, untrained didn't mean unprepared. For the step-in-time rooftop scene in Mary Poppins, Van Dyke rehearsed extensively to make the routine look loose, joyful, and spontaneous. That effortlessness earned the hard way. Van Dyke, who recently celebrated his 100th birthday, reportedly credits daily movement and dance for his longevity. Some people train for years to move like that, but Van Dyke just showed up and did it. Alright, now we have to take a quick pause because we've got to ask, who's your favorite character on the Dick Van Dyke Show? Is it Rob, Laura, Buddy, Sally, or Alan Brady? Tell us in the comments, and while you're there, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next Retro TV Deep Dive. Number 7. When Alan Brady accidentally joined Must See TV. In 1995, something wild happened. The black and white world of the Dick Van Dyke Show quietly collided with NBC's Must See TV lineup, and television history suddenly shared one very big universe. It all started with Carl Reiner. That year, Reiner reprised his role as the famously egotistical Alan Brady on Mad About You, in an episode titled The Alan Brady Show.
Caesar is a genius. Brilliant physical comedian, which, by the way, is very important for a narrator.
The episode aired on February 16, 1995, and treated Brady as a retired TV legend. The setup, Paul Buckman, played by Paul Reiser, hires Brady to narrate a documentary about the history of television. The episode was packed with loving nods to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Helen Hunt's Jamie even does a full Laura Petrie-style crying gag, and the closing credits switch to black and white with Alan Brady trying to convince Paul to trip over an ottoman. The performance was so good that Reiner won the 1995 Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series, officially making Alan Brady an Emmy-winning character 3 decades after his original debut. Now, here's where things get weird. Mad About You crossed over with Seinfeld when Cosmo Kramer was revealed to be subletting his apartment from Paul Buckman. Then, Mad About You crossed over with Friends, with Lisa Kudrow playing Ursula on Mad About You before showing up as her twin sister Phoebe on Friends, which means the Dick Van Dyke Show, Seinfeld, and Friends all technically exist in the same fictional universe. It was all very Tommy Westfall-ish, all because Carl Reiner showed up and stole an episode. Number 6. The last sitcom to stay black and white. By the mid-60s, television was moving on. Color was becoming the standard and black and white was fading fast. And the Dick Van Dyke Show was about to become one of the last major sitcoms to finish its run entirely in grayscale. When the series wrapped in 1966, most primetime shows had already made the switch. By the following season, nearly everything on the big 3 networks was being filmed in color. Not because of any official mandate, but because that's where the industry was headed. If the show had come back for a 6th season, sticking with black and white would have felt like a relic, but the switch never happened. Creator Carl Reiner had considered moving the show to color as early as season 3. The problem was cost. Filming in color would have added about $7,000 per episode, and Reiner believed that would eat into the show's profits. He also liked the idea of consistency. He didn't want future audiences watching a show that suddenly changed its look halfway through. Some seasons black and white, others color. So the show stayed in black and white, and after 5 seasons, it ended. Ironically, the color came later. In 2016, Reiner approved the colorization of select episodes, personally supervising the process. The team used original on-set photographs from the 1960s to match the colors of the sets and costumes, and Reiner made sure Mary Tyler Moore's hair was the correct shade of dark brunette, not the lighter tones she wore in later shows. 50 years later, the Dick Van Dyke Show finally got color, on Carl Reiner's terms. Number 5. Dick Van Dyke danced with himself. By the early 2000s, the Dick Van Dyke Show was long finished, a black and white classic living entirely in reruns. And yet, it came back twice. First came TV Land. In 2003, the network produced an animated special called The Alan Brady Show, not about Rob and Laura's home life, but about the show within the show. Carl Reiner returned to voice the endlessly egotistical Alan Brady. Dick Van Dyke and Rose Marie participated too. It was wild and very early 2000s cable. Then CBS went bigger. In 2004, the network aired the Dick Van Dyke Show Revisited, billed as the 159th episode. To bridge generations, CBS brought in Ray Romano as host, connecting a 1960s classic to a guy whose show was basically its spiritual descendant. The reunion featured nearly every surviving cast member: Mary Tyler Moore, Rose Marie, Larry Matthews, and Jerry Van Dyke. Maury Amsterdam and Richard Deacon appeared in archival footage. And then came the moment nobody saw coming. Van Dyke danced alongside a younger computer-generated version of himself. This wasn't some studio gimmick. Van Dyke had been obsessed with computer animation since buying a Commodore Amiga in 1991. He taught himself Lightwave 3D, created CGI special effects for Diagnosis Murder, and even displayed his work at SIGGRAPH, the biggest computer graphics conference in the world. For the reunion special, he animated his own digital dancing partner. So when people ask why the show came back after all those years, here's the real answer. Dick Van Dyke wanted to try something new, and the networks were smart enough to let him do it. Number 4, the tension between Rose Marie and Mary Tyler Moore was real. On screen, Laura Petrie and Sally Rogers basically lived in different worlds. Laura was the stay-at-home wife. Sally was the wisecracking comedy writer. They rarely shared scenes, but behind the scenes, there was friction, and both women talked about it. When the Dick Van Dyke Show was being cast, Rose Marie, already a well-established vaudeville and radio star, was the second person hired, right after Van Dyke.
What do you think, Sally?
I think it's a great joke.
Why do you think it's a great joke?
Because it's 5:30 and I got a date at 7.
She believed she was being brought on as the show's primary female presence. That wasn't an unreasonable assumption either. The show was originally conceived as a workplace comedy about television writers. Sally Rogers was supposed to be the center of that world. Then something shifted. As filming began, creator Carl Reiner and the writers realized that Mary Tyler Moore had far more comedic range than expected. Her chemistry with Van Dyke was undeniable. The show gradually leaned harder into the Petrie marriage, and the living room started competing with the writer's room for screen time. Rose Marie noticed. In her memoir, Hold the Roses, she admitted she was jealous. Moore was younger, prettier, and getting more attention, and Rose Marie owned it. Dick Van Dyke backed this up in his memoir, noting that the attention Moore received didn't sit well with Rosie. And Moore acknowledged it too. And after all, she described their dynamic as truce-like. They were polite, professional, but they weren't exactly laughing at each other's jokes. So yeah, it was tense, but here's the thing, they both stayed professional. Both women showed up, did the work, and stayed for all 5 seasons. And over time, the tension faded. By the time Rose Marie published her memoir in 2002, she said they'd become good friends. Both women unfortunately passed away in 2017, just weeks apart, and by then, the story had changed completely. There were no feuds, just 2 talented women navigating a show that kept changing the rules on them. Number 3, Hollywood misspelled Dick Van Dyke's name. When Dick Van Dyke got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, it was a lovely ceremony, with flowers, cameras, the whole deal. Then he looked down. There it was, engraved permanently in stone, Van Dyke. One word, no space. The ceremony took place right there on Hollywood Boulevard with cameras rolling, a crowd watching, and someone had clearly skipped spell check on a man whose name had been on television at this point for over 3 decades. Most stars would have been furious, but Dick Van Dyke, he laughed. Instead of stopping the ceremony or demanding a redo, he grabbed a marker and drew a slash between the N and the D, fixing his own name right there on the sidewalk. Because of course he did. Physical comedy legend meets permanent marker. He even joked about keeping the misspelled star as a souvenir, which honestly would have been the most Dick Van Dyke thing imaginable. The Hollywood Chamber of Commerce later replaced it with a correctly spelled version, but the moment stuck. Not because of the mistake, but because of how he handled it. Number 2, the smile was real, and so was the struggle. For decades, Dick Van Dyke was America's human antidepressant. Big grin, loose limbs, eternal optimism, the guy looked like joy with elbows. But behind the scenes, there was a battle most viewers never saw. A long, quiet fight with alcoholism that stretched through the 60s and into the early 70s. Van Dyke has said his drinking started as a way to loosen up socially. He was naturally shy, anxious, and suddenly expected to work rooms full of Hollywood strangers. Alcohol made that easier until it didn't. By 1972, it had caught up with him. That year, he checked himself into a hospital for 3 weeks of treatment, a decision that likely saved his life. Then came the moment that changed the conversation. On November 14, 1974, at a time when major stars absolutely did not admit things like this, Dick Van Dyke went on the Dick Cavett Show and spoke openly about his alcoholism. He talked about it as a disease, not a character flaw, nor a moral failure. That kind of honesty from a celebrity at that time was rare. The man who spent decades making joy look effortless had to fight for it. Number 1, 15 Emmys and a legacy that won't quit. There's a reason the Dick Van Dyke Show keeps showing up on every best sitcoms of all time list. It earned it, repeatedly, with hardware. During its original 5-season run from 1961 to 1966, the series won 15 Primetime Emmy Awards, and that's not a typo. 15 of them. And it didn't win by squeaking through in weak years. It dominated. The show won Outstanding Comedy Series 4 years in a row, 1963, 64, 65, and 66. 4 consecutive years. Most sitcoms are happy to get nominated once. This one kept showing up and taking the trophy home like it was picking up dry cleaning. The cast cleaned up too. Dick Van Dyke won 3 consecutive Emmys for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. Mary Tyler Moore won 2 for Outstanding Lead Actress, and creator Carl Reiner multiple wins for writing and producing, because why let anyone else have a turn? But here's the thing about awards. They fade, trends change, and what felt groundbreaking in 1964 can feel dusty by 1984. That didn't happen here. In 2002, TV Guide ranked The Dick Van Dyke Show number 13 on its list of the 50 greatest TV shows of all time. When they expanded the list to 60 shows in 2013, it was still in the top 20, holding its own against decades of competition. The Writers Guild of America put it at number 14 on its list of the 101 best written TV series. Not best written comedies, best written series, period. That's the difference between winning awards and earning them. Some shows get trophies. This one became the thing other shows get measured against. And there you have it, 15 weird facts about the Dick Van Dyke Show. Which fact blew your mind the most, and which one did we miss? Let us know down in the comments below, and hit like if this stirred up some rerun memories, and subscribe for more deep dives into your favorite classic TV shows. Until next time, this is Remember When.